Hello and welcome back to Constructive Interference. I am your host, Joel Kurtnitis, here as always with Josh Hugo. And guess what we're not going to talk about tonight, Josh?
Brett Kavanaugh?
Well, yeah, more narrowly Brett Kavanaugh for sure. Although, it's still kind of fun controversy surrounding that. But you know what? Let's go bigger. Think bigger. Think bigger. We're not going to go into politics tonight. I mean, sure, there might be an occasional mention here and there because you're you and I'm me. But in general, we got something else to talk about.
Wow, this is what was our goal from the beginning. We finally achieved it.
I know, right?
Nice.
Like, it's unbelievable. You actually come to find out there's more to life than CNN. It's just ridiculous. No, there's a couple things we wanted to go over this week, despite the occasional drift into politics that we've had the last couple weeks. I mean, there's just so much more to talk about. And this week, we're heading up to Halloween. So what better to do than to head into theology, the spiritual. How about that? So what we've got for you tonight is we've got some talk about evangelicals losing the truth of the gospel. There's a great article about that we wanted to kind of pull apart and discuss and kind of see what the evangelical movement in America looks like right now and maybe why. And then, you know what? Let's talk about Halloween too. We're gonna field some questions on Halloween in terms of what do Christians do with Halloween? What do churches do with Halloween? And how does that tie back to the predicament that Americans of faith find themselves in terms of theology and the decline of the church that has been widely discussed over time. So, just to get started, this article on not the decline of evangelicals, but evangelicals losing the truth of the gospel. So the study was by Legionnaire Ministries. I first saw it in the Maven where there was an article on it, and basically it's a survey. The State of Theology survey results were released, and as it says in the article, they were depressing. Now, there's always, if you look at numbers especially coming out of Christianity, a lot of people that do surveys and polls of the Christian community have a reason, and a lot of the data that comes out is kind of makes Christians sometimes, or makes trends within Christianity, I'll say, look worse than they are. This one, I don't know if you can be as critical about it. I mean, these numbers are actually pretty bad. So one of the keys that were in there, that was in the study, was in 2016, 49% of evangelicals agreed with the statement that Jesus was exclusively the only way to heaven. 43% disagreed. Today, however, that number is 51%. So we have crossed the halfway mark of Christians who believe that you can get to heaven without Christ. I mean, that's just pretty much what it comes down to. 42% disagree with that statement. And then, out of the 3,000 and by the way, this is evangelicals. We're not just talking about kind of Americans who think they're Christian because they're born in America and America's a Christian. Like this is evangelicals. This is the people who are known in the United States generally as being very passionate and very excited about Christianity, kind of the keepers of the faith, if you will, are American evangelicals, particularly on the in the political wing. But one of the statements though was true or false. God accepts worship of all religions, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and that was kind of the basis of that 51% of evangelicals agreed with that statement. And you know what, Josh, sound off on that, because I'm going to try to get my ire under control here. Sound off on that one.
On God accepting the worship from all religions?
Yes, by all means.
Well, that, along with several other statements here that were done in this study, basically, if that's the case, then what's the point of it? I mean, even aside from whether or not these statements are true or compatible with Christianity, many of them are simply nullifying to Christianity. Like, if God accepts the prayers of Muslims praying to Allah, Muslims who, as an article of their faith, deny the divinity of Jesus Christ, who demote Jesus to the level of Moses or one of the other prophets, who do not believe in the triune God, who do not believe that Jesus died for our sins, and those are explicit parts of Muslim doctrine. So if God hears the prayers of those people and accepts them as being the same as the prayers of Christians who do accept the divinity of Christ, and who do believe, that Jesus was greater than any prophet, it makes you wonder what's the point, you know?
Well,
Because
yeah,
if God's going to accept, sounds like basically anything that anybody who utters any sort of prayer to whatever sort of great spirit they believe in is accepted by God, then what's the point of even having a distinct religion?
I really am going to challenge your. I don't think you should be able to use the term Great Spirit without a DNA test.
I'm sure I'm at least 1,024th. I'm pretty sure that I am.
I mean,
I think I'm
it
actually
doesn't it
more than
defeat the
that.
concept. I mean, here was my first thought. Doesn't it defeat the concept of monotheism? Like that's the whole point, right? They cited specifically the three major monotheistic religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam. They don't agree on God. If you don't agree on God and you're a monotheistic religion, what do you do? Like that defeats the whole purpose. I mean, are we really back to that point? I mean, we got Christians now basically, saying the same things that ancient Greeks and Romans did. Oh, you're a Zeus guy? That's cool. I'm a Mercury guy. You know, it's
That
all
is a
good.
great analogy, yes.
Yeah, we'll all be feasting in Valhalla together. No worries. Yeah, I know I just mixed cultures
Well,
there, but
that's
it
okay.
just
Apparently, Thor accepts the prayers of all religions, so
well,
we
right,
don't.
right. Well, there's something to be said. Inclusiveness now, it does say something about this gospel of inclusiveness, which has gone everywhere from political circles, cultural circles. It's in the workplace. I mean, you have to take inclusiveness classes now in corporate America, but it does speak to the religious nature of that. It's an extremely religious concept, as a lot of things are that kind of get overlooked. Um, and I guess we should have set out some context here. I'm a Christian. Josh, you're a Christian, right? I mean, I think you are anyway. You sort of act like one.
Yes, yes, Joel.
Okay. So,
I will admit it. Yes, I will admit that I'm a Christian.
well, that we can still debate on whether you're the elect or not. I'll have to consult some of my
Ooh,
Calvinist friends about that.
let's not.
Right.
Let's not do that. Let's not.
No.
I mean, yeah, we're talking about religion, but let's not go nuts here.
Well, right. And so, but anyway, so just as context for this, like I am a Christian. I don't like a lot of labels within Christianity. To me, I think denominations for the most part are just schisms in the church. I've struggled with labels, but the term evangelical, I don't even think it's a denominational label per se. It's a subset of American Christianity that for a long time many of us were very proud of. We were very proud to wear that label. There's a problem with evangelicalism in America. And when you look at this, there was remind me, what was the other number in there that you said that had kind of struck your interest?
Oh, the number that I found just shocking in this study was the what was it? The statement was that Jesus is the first and greatest being created by God, uh,
Right.
and 73% of evangelicals agreed with that statement. Uh,
73%.
yeah, and only
So almost three quarters.
yeah, and only 14% gave their strong disagreement with it, which just sort of dumbfounded me. That's so foundational. If I may indulge in reading from the Bible here for a moment, uh, John chapter 1 begins, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." So talking about Jesus as the Word there, it's there and several other places in the Bible, it's very explicit that Jesus is God, uncreated God, and not something that God made. Um, so that so many people who attend church, who claim to respect the Bible, would be able to agree with the statement that Jesus is the best thing God made. I was like, just like, what?
Well, right. And isn't that a defining point for a lot of cults that Christians reject by and large as heretical? I mean, the divinity of Christ, that was one of the earliest and most often challenged tenets of Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a student of church history per se, but yes, I know it's definitely a correct statement.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of popular sects of Christianity today that would, by most evangelicals by evangelical standards, I'll say, would be considered heretical because they teach that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the 73%, that's shocking. I mean, if you had told me a quarter, I would say, well, there's always a bunch of people that maybe haven't, learned it yet, haven't had the opportunity to yet. But here's when I look at this, okay, so there's a line in this article that's sort of summarizing it in the Maven. There'll be a link in the description of this, by the way. But there's a line where the author says, "Come on, evangelicals, do you even church?" And I got stuck on that phrase because I thought, I know church attendance isn't everything, but by and large, they do church, and maybe that's the problem. Okay, so according to Pew, attendance at religious services, and by the way, this link will be in the description as well. We like to source our claims here. 36% attend church at least once a week. 33% once or twice a month, a few times a year, and 30% seldom or never, and 1% don't know, which, I'm intrigued by that too. How do you not know if you go to church? I don't know. I drank a 6-pack that morning. I'm not really sure where I ended up. It could have been church. I don't know. But so I mean, you've got a significant portion of Americans that do still attend weekly services, and you got a much higher percentage, obviously, of evangelicals who.
Well, I think that's one of the definitions that they use to define, an evangelical is they do attend church regularly.
Well, it's a marker, but the same Pew research shows that evangelical Protestants, at least 58%, attend at least once a week, which is significantly high. I mean, the only higher numbers than that are Jehovah's Witnesses, not to mention one of the groups that we talked about a minute ago, and Mormons, not to mention another one. But yeah, that's the third highest church attendance percentage. So the problem is not that they're not showing up to church, although obviously you could have a higher percentage than that. I would argue that much of the problem is that once they're there, they're not learning these things. And I know, my experience in what you might call the modern American mainstream church is that I don't know where you would hear this kind of thing. You show up and you hear about how God can fix your family and break your addictions and can generally help you have a better, easier, more fun life. At least that's what the billboards tell me. So what's the problem with evangelical churches in America that can allow, things to get to the point where 73% of American evangelicals don't know that Jesus Christ was not a created being?
Well, that's a very complex topic.
We're going to solve it right here.
We'll solve it right here. Yeah.
Right here today.
Well, if you want this podcast to be half hour long, I mean, we need this to be at least 25 times that length to really dig into that question. But if you want to give like a real general kind of in a nutshell answer, the answer is kind of what you touched on, the emotional aspect. Church has become such an emotional experience for people. Where people go to church, they expect to hear an inspirational or an uplifting message. And if you listen to Christian radio, a lot of stations have even shied away from describing themselves as being Christian. What you hear a lot is positive hits or inspirational radio or family friendly. And then the label Christian often isn't even used anymore because that's not the emphasis.
Yeah, and that extends to our movies too. Christians have developed this kind of bubble subculture. And by the way, Christian movies, I'm sorry. God bless the folks that make Christian movies. I appreciate what they do. A lot of talented folks. But I got a little bit of a bone to pick with the quality of Christian movies. And I feel like, you can tell 5 minutes into a Christian movie because it's got that Hallmark Channel feel. And exactly what you're saying, it's so feeling heavy that if they don't make you cry by the end of it, they've missed their mark, and it's such a defining topic. And I think you're starting to see, especially I think in younger Christians today, you're starting to see a little bit of rebellion against that, which has resulted in sort of a hyper orthodoxy, which is moving away from the super churches, moving away from the wishy-washy Christianity and into what they consider to be the opposite. I will reserve judgment for the time being, but more into traditional orthodox, a cappella hymn singing, old school bearded preacher churches. And these are not large churches typically, but you are seeing a trend in that direction. I watched a lot of folks who were sick of that version of evangelicalism actually convert to Catholicism, which I didn't even think was possible, right? Like growing up a Protestant evangelical kid, I didn't even think it was possible. I'm like, oh my gosh, how could somebody convert from being a Protestant to being a Catholic? Isn't that backwards? Isn't there a law against that? But no, like that is actually part of the reaction against this sort of watered down evangelical culture and what the churches are or not teaching. I mean, you ask people, if they have a church or go to church regularly, the answers sometimes tell you the story even before they even tell you where they're going, right? Well, we're looking for a place with a good, child care program, or, we're looking for a place that's got great breakfast food. I mean, the things that people try to cite as an attraction to churches, it's just hard for me to picture the New Testament church going off of that,
Hmm. Well, you mentioned people going more toward orthodoxy or even toward Catholicism, and that's really a logical reaction if you think about it, because the things you've been mentioning, the emotionalism, the thinking, God, you need to go to God because God's going to make you happy, He's going to fix your addictions. If it's a country song, you're going to get your truck back. Whatever it is that you want, God is going to do that for you, and that is so generic. That is such like a generic, like Oprah Winfrey self-help type of message.
Mm-hmm.
You can go anywhere. You can go anywhere, turn on any TV, go to any bookstore, and find tons of material that's telling you how it can make your life happier and easier, and fix your problems. So by going after this emotionalism, the evangelical churches are making themselves generic. They're sort of camouflaging themselves. And I mean, I'm just, as a Protestant, I'm just going to say this: Catholicism is weird, right? there's all the rituals and the
That may not be an objective statement.
No, I mean that's obviously my perspective, but I mean it's perspective, I'm sure, of many Protestants who have very little firsthand experience with the Catholic Church. It's weird. It's weird. And that, I think, is the appeal, because the evangelical churches aren't weird anymore. If you go to church and it feels like Starbucks, well, just go to Starbucks. Because when people go to church,
the coffee's better.
Yeah, well, probably. I mean, if you like Starbucks coffee. But it's like when people go to church, they want to have some sort of experience that transcends the everyday. They want to have a spiritual experience. And if going there, they just get the same thing they could get by going to Barnes and Noble and grabbing a coffee and going to the self-help section, why go?
Right. And we're gonna, what, I want to come back to that difference, that want something different, want something strange. But I also worry that, that part of that reaction, and this is sort of a natural tendency of mankind, is you have the hyper emotional, and the reaction tends to be, the isolated hyper rational. And that's what I worry about some with the overreaction, because, as Paul said, and I won't be able to cite the scripture or the chapter and verse on this one, but knowledge puffs up, love edifies. And that's a threat to the church too, because when you get people who are, obsessed with the knowledge side of it, which I confess that's my weakness, is I tend to steer toward that side. I tend to forget the love side. I tend to forget that people need compassion. I tend to forget the things that the church now has gone too far on. So I think, finding that balance in the middle is important, but balance requires discernment. And that's what we're going to move on to next year, because Halloween is right around the corner. And this every year is a topic for Christians to discuss, to argue about, to fight about, to, diss each other about. And, where does when it comes to discernment in American Christianity, there might not be a more divisive holiday than Halloween. Maybe not in terms of the philosophy of it, but definitely in the practicality of it, and in the observance of it. There's a lot of division around this. So what's your take on it? Is Halloween evil? What do you do with it? How can you tell?
Well, in judging anything like this, I always tend to take, I guess, a pragmatic approach. I ask, what does it actually do? Now, I've heard, and I've done a little bit of research on this, and of course, the research depends on what sources you ask. And researching something like this is hard anyway, because really you're researching a dozen different disparate traditions, from 100 different parts of Europe and other places, that are sort of informing what we think of as Halloween now.
And that's the case with most holidays, right? It's sort of a hodgepodge of old traditions all lumped together over time.
Right. So it's not as if there was like one true history of Halloween, like there's one true history of George Washington. It's not like that. It's even trying to research the actual roots and the actual meaning of Halloween is going to be sort of I guess I'll say a gamble or a grab bag. You'll find different things depending on what your technique for research is and what sources you go to. So that said, I'm really not familiar with the history of Halloween. I don't know what it's quote unquote really all about. To me, Halloween is all the people in my neighborhood dress up in costumes that reflect their likes and their personalities, and are nice to each other.
Hmm.
So to me, Halloween seems mostly like sort of a celebration of neighborliness, and that's mostly what I get out of it. Now I know also I see around you'll see people with the bloody slasher masks on, or people who will uh, just put gross displays in their lawns, and I don't like that. You know that sort of irritates me. But I see more people who take sort of a positive take on it, and decorate their houses in ways that are appealing, with pumpkins or with fun characters. And of course, the actual Halloween night, which the highlight is trick or treating, to me just seems like, hey, I'm gonna go knock on neighbors' doors, say hi to them, be friendly to them, and see what costumes they think are fun. Because we're neighbors and we like each other, and that's pretty much the extent of my take on it.
Hmm. Pagan.
Uh, well, I'm a Zeus guy. What you said?
No, no, I can respect that. So I come from a little bit of a different take on it, and I think the first thing that I want to note from my side is I have celebrated Halloween when I was younger. I have not celebrated Halloween when I was older. I do not celebrate Halloween now, but our family also doesn't. We don't condemn anybody else who does. I feel like very very clearly scripturally there are some things that are not essentials of the faith that we have liberty in, right? Like you can believe one thing, I can believe another. One man esteems one day above another. One man esteems every day alike. Let each be persuaded in his own mind. So I think there's room within Christianity to have both these things, and I also think it comes down to the leading of the Spirit on this, right? Because the key to Christianity is the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. It's supposed to be, hey, we're led from within, not pushed from without. And the point of that is that it leads Christians will be led in different directions, always in the direction that's consistent with God and His character, but within that, different directions practically. Um, so the reason that our family doesn't celebrate it, it's not that we're afraid of it or we feel like it's going to invite bad spiritual forces or anything like that. Like we know we're protected in Christ, but we do feel like, and this comes back to what you were saying about kind of the strangeness missing from the church. We feel like it's an opportunity to practice holiness in everyday life. There's not, in the day to day, I'm not going to say there's not opportunities. There's always opportunities to practice holiness and to be set apart for God. But some of them are hard to see and some of them are easy to see. And for me, this is one where I look at it and I see what everybody else is doing. And I look and I sort of, at some point sort of looked into this and said, I just want to evaluate this and see, is there any good that can be taken from this that's worth the associations that come with it. And when I say associations, I'm talking about abstain from all appearance of evil or whatnot. And what I determined in my life was, you know, I want that opportunity to be able to say, we don't do this, and I know that people will think it's weird, but almost invariably they ask why, and that why is an opportunity to say, the things that I believe about it, which is, hey, we don't condemn people over this, but we also choose not to celebrate darkness. We choose not to celebrate fear. We choose not to celebrate death. We choose not to celebrate all the things that are associated with this. And we feel like if we're going to have a time of celebration and a time of being with family and going out and meeting neighbors and doing friends, we'd like it to be on different terms than this. And so it is difficult. It is awkward. People look at us like we're crazy. We don't have the candy out on the porch when everybody else does, and so there's a shame that comes with that. But I feel like that's a shame that is worth bearing, because there's so few opportunities. There's not fewer opportunities. Let me rephrase that. There's a lot of things where we just sort of go along with the weight of culture. And on this one, I just decided that was that was something that I didn't want to go along with. The other part of it, and I think when it comes back to fear in my life, especially as I was younger, I was afraid of a number of things. Mostly not real things. It was just I had an active imagination and I had nightmares. Um, and then as I got older, I found myself getting into horror movies for some reason. And I don't know if that's, I haven't talked to a psychologist. I don't know if that's natural or unnatural, that when you're scared of things, you seek them out. But but I did. And at one point, I remember watching. You know what it was? It was the Blair Witch Project back in the day that put me over the edge, and I had nightmares about that for days. And I was a young adult by then, and I was praying about it and saying, Lord, I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be afraid of things. I don't want to be, you know, like this where I just have these images stuck in my mind. I hate that. And God's like, I felt like God was just, talking to me and said, well, then why do you seek him out? Why do you do this? The whole Bible is just packed with hundreds of references to fear not, don't be afraid, fear not, have courage, be courageous, be strong, be bold. That's all that the Bible says. The only thing in the Bible that we're really, encouraged to fear is God. And so I looked at it and I thought, I am part of a culture that values fear. I don't want to value fear. I want to value courage. I want to value boldness. So anyway, so that's sort of the context around mine. And I gave up watching horror movies for that too. I left them behind. It was difficult at first, but I feel like my demeanor and my mindset and a lot about me has changed as I've made an active decision not to seek fear. And so for me, Halloween is part of that.
Okay. Well, I completely respect everything you just said. I don't agree with what you just said, obviously. So like I said, to me, Halloween is not necessarily those things. But everything you just said made great sense. You had the reasons why you have all these opinions you hold. They were logical reasons. You scripturally sound reasons.
See, this is why I have Josh on the program, to agree with me. He's good at this.
It doesn't really work if you say that to the audience. I mean, you just like spoiled the illusion.
Man.
Anyway,
that's why I pay you the big bucks, dog.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. I'll take the big bucks. But what you just said made sense. It comes from a place of good reasoning, of scriptural basis, and of good motivation, and therefore I can respect it. The Bible actually talks about what I think are disagreements very similar to this. When it talks about food sacrificed to idols, this is a controversy that came up in the early church. It's discussed specifically in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 8. So what would happen here is in the pagan Greek and Roman culture, they would do sacrifices in the temples to the various gods, to Zeus or to Athena or whatever, and the meat that they use, of course, the god didn't eat the meat because they weren't real. the statue of Artemis did not actually consume the meat that was offered to her, so they had to do something with it afterwards. And what they would do with it is they would sell it, for people to eat, and it was cheap because it had been already used in a sense, like open box meat.
I just want to know if they called it an indulgence.
I mean, I guess no.
That's Reformation Day joke. We'll get to that.
Oh, sorry. I get jokes. But yeah, so they have basically this open box meat. It was the cheap stuff. You could get it more cheaply than the other meat because it had been sacrificed to idols. But a lot of the people who were new Christians had a real problem eating this because to them it was a sacrifice. So this meat has been sacrificed to Zeus. Therefore, it is associated with Zeus. Therefore, it is tainted. I can't eat it with a good conscience. And what Paul said to the early Christians in 1 Corinthians 8, he said, we know Zeus isn't real. These gods are fake. So obviously anything associated with them is also fake and meaningless. But if it offends your conscience, if in your own heart you cannot do this thing, with a clean conscience, if to you it's associated with Zeus and to you it bothers you, then you should not eat that meat because you should not offend your own conscience. To one person, eating the meat is okay. To another person, it is sin. And Paul tells the Christians not to judge each other based upon this. If one person's conscience allows him to eat the meat, that's fine. If another person's doesn't, that's also fine. Do not judge each other for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I that's why I say, we don't condemn anybody that participates in Halloween. For us, it's a family commitment, and it's a question of is this an opportunity for us to show ourselves different from the world? And those opportunities are there all the time if you look for them. So, but I will say, in general, I don't like it when Christians sort of take pagan holidays and dress them up as Christian in an attempt to reach out to people to do those holidays. I feel like that sort of defeats the purpose of being set apart, right? It's like, here's an opportunity to be separate from the world. So instead, we're not going to be separate. We're going to do everything the world does and just call it by a different name. But I will say there is an opportunity that's sort of convenient timing, back to the joke there that you almost didn't get. October 31st happens to not just be Halloween. It also happens to be Reformation Day, the day that Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the church and sparked the Protestant Reformation. One of the things that I would love to, and our family have been working on this, is if we hadn't been moving into a different house this last couple of years, it would have happened. But the movie Luther, have you seen it?
I have.
Okay, yeah, I think it's a great movie. I think it's a fantastic movie. It stars Joseph Fiennes, I think. And there's a good opportunity there if you want to have friends over and have family over and have some discussions that maybe don't center around just Halloween. That's a great opportunity there because it literally happened on the same day. So that's an event that I usually take, and it's super nerdy, and again, people look at you funny, but it can be useful. But what are some other cultural references where Christians, get into this discernment thing and they land on different sides pretty fiercely?
Well, that's another one that could have a lot of time spent discussing it. One thing that comes to my mind is marriage, marriage and sexuality, and what is the basis of that. And of course, the biblical basis is one that is based upon vows, and the formation of families, whereas the worldly basis is one that's based upon my feelings and what makes me happy. And unfortunately, the Christian world has, to a large extent, adopted that secular mindset. That love and sexuality is about making me happy. Not to get off on a huge tangent here, but that's one thing where people obviously come down very much on different sides.
Sure. Yeah, and I think another one is when we're talking about holidays in terms of Halloween, but when you look at Christians and entertainment, this question comes up all the time too. Whether it's hey, should Christians watch Game of Thrones? Should Christians read Harry Potter? I mean, these are some of the questions that have been thrown around, and it's not just our generation either. I mean, we should bring that up. These are discussions that have been going on for hundreds of years within the church. Is what's acceptable for Christians, what's not. What does the church need to agree on, and what can people just individually have the liberty to do, based on their own conscience, like we were talking about earlier.
And I think what's most important there is to realize, for certain things, there are correct answers. I mean, some things are clearly beyond the pale, but for the most part, the most important thing is to do what you did, Joel, when you discussed why you were opposed to personally celebrating Halloween, is to have this honest and biblically informed reasoning as to why you do or do not agree with that. And going through that process of honest reasoning, where you examine yourself and question yourself and think, what do I really believe and why? That's vital.
So my process on that, I think it began with, when I was a child, we weren't allowed to do a lot of things that other kids were allowed to do. We weren't allowed to have game consoles, for instance. We weren't, I know, right? That sort of backfired when I got older, but, we weren't allowed to watch what I would consider fairly innocent shows because they, included witchcraft, or they included things that, my parents saw as potentially spiritually damaging to us. And I didn't appreciate it at the time. But the line that we always got, because, of course, when you're a kid, your first defense is, well, everybody else does, right? But what my mom would always tell us is, others may, we may not. And at the time, I thought it was snide and stupid. And, especially when I got into my teenage years, I just didn't have a lot of respect for that kind of thing, right? But now I understand. And what she really meant with that was what Paul talked about in the epistles, which was all things are lawful, not all things are expedient. All things are lawful, but all things edify not. That's sort of what she was getting at in there. And I think that's sort of the standard that Christians need to apply to things like this is, okay, it's not good enough to say, what can I get away with? It's not good enough to say, is this a sin? If you're asking the question, is this a sin? You're probably on the wrong side to start with. It's not the right question to ask. And that's where I think, this is a huge theological topic, but I think, for Christians, if you want to walk close to Christ, then the question that you ask is, how what's the most that I can please God through this? What is the most that I can give of my life in this? What is the biggest sacrifice that I can make? How can I be more removed from the world? How can I be more pure? How can I be more faithful? And if you're asking those kinds of questions, it's funny, you really don't find yourself walking the line very often, because it's just like in Romans 8, walk in the Spirit and you won't fulfill the lust of the flesh. It's just that simple. It's one of the simplest equations in the whole Bible. Walk in the Spirit and you won't fulfill the lust of the flesh. You won't get close. So I would say that's the key takeaway for the key takeaway for me out of this is, have that relationship with God to the point that you don't have to ask these kinds of questions. And that's not only going to help you in decisions like this and discernment, it's also going to help you seek out God on the things that matter, as we talked about in the beginning of the program, or evangelicals that might not be solid on their theology. You know what? We're not here to make fun of you. If you're out there and you're like, hey, I didn't know that. I'm an evangelical. I love to worship. I love fellow believers. I didn't know these things. You know what? This is a great opportunity. Just, go out there, learn more about God, spend some more time in the Word, spend some more time, studying this, because it's religion and Christianity and faith is an element of who we are that's very deep and very complex. And if you're not spending the time on that to understand it fully, you're actually doing yourself a disservice on it. So I think that's all we have for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us at Constructive Interference. We will look forward to talking to you next week.